of Talanoa with Tupe is brought to you by Niche Media and the Waiata Arts Trust.
Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days.
Oh, yeah.
Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back
Old school, let's go
back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days.
Talofa lava malole soifua maua malelangi e mama. Ni sambola vinaka ke muni sakana wikanda mai viti. Hello everyone and welcome to Talanoa with Tupe. This is a show where we celebrate and highlight Pasifika success in all its many forms. Each week we sit down with a different Pacific thought leader to hear about their journey and learn from their experience. Our guest today is Laulu Mac Leauanae, Chief Executive Officer of the Ministry of Pacific Peoples and the only Pasifika Chief Executive in the public sector. Previously, Laulu practiced as a lawyer before moving into management in the health sector, and then he became the Chief Executive Officer of the Pacific Cooperation Foundation. I'm looking forward to today's Talanoa because quite often in the New Zealand context, leadership is associated with ambition and assertiveness. But Laulu has been recognised as an effective leader in the New Zealand public service, while exemplifying humble servant leadership, traits which are highly valued in the Pacific context. Before we sit down with our guest, let's see how we go with our Blue Pacific quiz. How well do you know the countries in our beautiful region? Let's find out.
Kia ora.
Talofa lava.
My name is Tuasiri.
And my name is Telesia. And we are members of the Pacific Social Justice League. And we're going to give you a quiz on our Blue Pacific.
Let's go.
Can you tell us which country this flag belongs to?
Can you tell us the capital of this country?
Can you tell us the name of the leader of this country?
And lastly, can you tell us what currency they use in this country?
Stick around to the end of the show so we can compare our answers.
See you soon.
Thank you, Telesia and Tuasivi. Up next, it's our segment on Pacific literature, presented by Pacific author Leilani Tamu.
Talofa lava malo lele, whakalofa lahi atu. My name is Leilani Tamu. I'm a poet and an editor, and I'm passionate about Pacific books. The book that I'm speaking to you about today is called Englishing My Samoan, a collection of speeches and letters, and it's by one of our most important li'i in the Pacific. It's by Tuiatua Tupua Tamasese Taisi Tupuola Tufunga Efi, who of course is a member of our Tamainga. So the book was published in 1995, and it's a collection of speeches and articles, and it really covers a span of subjects in terms of, I guess, Tupua's experiences in life, particularly over the 1970s through to the 1990s. Covers everything from reflections on sport to politics to culture. It has a great foreword in it by one of our New Zealand ariki, Sir Tipene O'Regan, who reflects on how Tupua's writing really underscores the relationship between New Zealand, Aotearoa and Samoa, and how this has been a long relationship. It's a very easy book to read. Each piece is only 2 to 3 pages long, and one of my favorites was, it was a heartfelt obituary and reflection that Tupua wrote upon the death of his mother. One of the things that I really loved in this tribute was how he talked about how value is measured by Love's Labour. It's a great book and I highly recommend you read it. If you're interested in more of my reviews or even writing a review yourself, please check out my website below.
After the break, we're joined by Laulu Mac Leauanae, Chief Executive Officer of the Ministry of Pacific Peoples and the only Pasifika CE in the public sector. Welcome back to Talanoa Tupe. Today we're joined by Laulu Mac Leauanae, Chief Executive Officer of the Ministry of Pacific Peoples and the only Pasifika Chief Executive in the public sector. Talawhalawa lawa fionga Laulu, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you here, and there's a lot I want to cover about your leadership journey. But first, can we start at the beginning? Because you're a proud son of Samoa. What were the values that your parents instilled in you that enabled you to, that set you up for success?
I think I saw Mum and Dad live the values that they wanted us to live. You know, the concepts of fa'aloalo, you know, respect, alofa, love, reciprocity, the sense of service, tautua. These are the things that they outworked and lived in their everyday lives. Dad was the first of his generation to come to New Zealand, and the same with Mum. And so they brought all of their families, so we lived in a very communal home. So we had a very, you know, loving, and whilst we didn't have much, I didn't know that we didn't. There was a lot of love, alofa. And so those kind of values of others, working together for others, was really big in Mum and Dad's lives. And then we went to Henderson e Whakasa, so I grew up in the church. So there were those Christian values that came through. So the combination of the whaasamoananga combined with the Christian values and our faith, you know, framed the values by which I, you know, lead and then subsequently live.
So if we can touch a bit more on your Christian journey. So you went to the University of Auckland, where you were part of the leadership of Pacific Students for Christ.
Yeah.
How did being a leader in that group prepare you for your career?
I think it stems back from Mum and Dad. So because Mum and Dad were the first of their generation, and then I am the firstborn of both on my dad's side, and then on my mum's side, I was the oldest here in New Zealand. So I was always had a sense of being a leader just from being at home, and then through church came to faith, and so that played a really, really important role. So by the time I got to university, it was natural that I would be part of the Pacific Students for Christ, and, you know, meet up with the likes of Efeso Collins and Herman Paul Ritzlav and Wilmerson. There's a whole generation of us. And so then, in that journey of PCFC, the difference of leading an organisation that I have now and leading that type of group is all volunteer. I can't force people to do anything. And so there was a natural, you know, kind of like the things that I learned through that experience was clear. What is our vision for PCFC? We wanted young Pacific people to feel welcome and comfortable in having a faith in the university, and that there was a place of worship which was very Pacific. So, you know, we chilled, we laughed, we cried, all of that stuff, the best of who we are as a people. So then we as a leadership team, we made sure we kept the values that we had instilled in our own homes and brought them to the university. So interesting leadership team, you know, because we do things how we do, you know, like real family-oriented, consensus type leadership approach. Everyone has a view, everyone has a voice. And so then, you know, it brought the best out of us. And I think, you know, through that time, we had amazing services, you know, 150 strong, 200 strong. There were times where McLaurin Chapel would have to open up the partition because it was a thriving little group of young Pacific Christians that were just wanting to, change the world back in those days, yeah.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s. So I graduated in 98, so it's a long time ago.
It's so interesting because you mentioned some of the other people in your cohort, and there was a whole group of you that were involved in the leadership of Pacific Students for Christ who have now gone on to do really big things. And I think that's so important because sometimes when we do voluntary work or we are involved in organisations, church, for example, people don't think to write that down on their CV.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was just, we were such a minority too, the Pacific student doing well at university was an anomaly, it wasn't the norm. And so there was a number of factors that meant that, we all came together and then we had this common faith that meant that, we were all together going through this journey because we'd come together, this group of us, and then we'll go back into the various classes and that, and we're the minority in those classes. I studied law, so there was a small group of us Pacific that were in law, and so then to come into a place where one, faith is normal, and then two, we're Pacific, we're just ourselves. So it was a kind of like also a coping mechanism or strength of a network, and then coupled with that, our parents came for us to do well at school so that we can get greater opportunities and so that we can serve even more. And so that drive too, there was that commonality amongst us. And so, I'm really proud when I look at the group of us that have done well, yourself included, as Sarah and the like. There's a whole cohort of us that are doing really well. If back in the 90s we were to say, hey, Mac, Uzo, you're going to be chief executive for the Ministry for Pacific Peoples, I would say, that ain't ever going to happen. But somehow, thankfully, by God's grace, we've been able to achieve, a lot of us, a lot of good things for our community.
Yeah, so from what you've just shared, it sounds like you had the support, the sense of belonging. You had that real drive from your, family, that connection to the migrant dream. And also something you touched on earlier was that you have the chance to develop your leadership skills when you don't have management levers, right? Because I think people think that once you become a chief executive or once you get into a management role, that's when you're a leader, when actually it takes much more... I think you have to draw on all of your powers of persuasion and influence when you don't have a role like that.
That's right. I think of the different proverbs that our parents would teach us. The common one, ole ala le pule le tautua, the pathway to leadership is through service. So if I serve others and I serve you with everything that I have, not that I'm manipulating you, but there's a sense of reciprocity. If I give everything for you and I give the best for you, and then there's the sense that I want to do that back for you too. And so the way that we run our leadership team was very much like that. I'm going to sacrifice for you for the greater good. This is what we want to do. Come on, let's do this together. And that kind of sense of buy-in, and I see that with, how my dad used to run things, back with his family. But most of the time it was the sense of consensus. Let's all move together. We all move in the same direction in unity. So powerful. And so those are the things that, that doesn't then stop just because I'm leading an agency. It's the same principles of leadership, without the formal authority to then having the formal authority, but still utilizing those same principles. If you have to lead by position, that's the weakest form of leadership. And so, that's John Maxwell, that's not Mac Leauanae. And so then, that influence and through service and then leading because of that service is powerful.
So you had a very strong grounding in the church and in your family to prepare you for your leadership roles. So how did you take those qualities and then apply them? Because you've had quite a varied career. You practiced as a lawyer initially, and then you worked in the public, in the health sector, and now you are where you are.
before I got, because that's what I have to put up on my website to make it look good. But when I finished law, my first role out of law school was I was a typeset ad working at classifieds. I was in the call center. Whilst I'd done a law degree, my mindset was still, I'm going to really struggle. I want to do something that I know I can do. So instead of practicing law or going to do profs, I went and was typesetting ads. So I was in the call center. My mindset determined that that's where I should sit, even though I'd done all this leadership stuff at PCFC. And my wife now, Alison, thankfully was patient with me. We were just courting at the time, but just, encouraged me that, hey, actually there's more to what you're called to than just this. And so once I shifted my mindset, got into profs, and it wasn't until I got to profs that I realized, man, I'm just as good as any of these guys if I put the time and effort into really studying and doing well. And so then from there, got into Sullivan and Associates, which was a small boutique firm. And I learned a lot from this American lawyer. And that's where I learned hustle, was from that man. I learned hustle from my mum and my dad, but the term hustle I learned from this American. He'd go, Mac, where's your case files? Oh, yeah, they're here. So where are you at with your case files? Oh, no, I'm all up to date. So what time did you call that case manager there? Oh, this morning. It's 2 o'clock now. You still haven't heard. Have you emailed? Have you texted? Have you called? You keep going and going and going until you get an answer. And so then I just applied that to everything I do. I just hustle at every step of the way. And I've seen that doesn't mean that I'm now no longer Pacific. It's the heart of why I do things, just channeled in a manner that will make it work in this environment. So from there, thankfully got into the Pacific Business Trust. I learned a lot in ProCare Health Limited, so that was the health management side. And in that role, I had 7 entities that I had to look after. And so that meant that there were 7 board meetings, 7 chairmen, 7 board papers. Some were monthly, some were bi-monthly. But I learned in that process governance, management, operations, finances, people, in this short 3-year, 4-year period, from coming Pacific Health Manager to then becoming a Senior Manager, Community and Funding. And so I think I learned a lot through that process of how to run an organisation, the numbers, profit and loss, balance sheets, all that kind of stuff. So by the time I got to, become the Chief Executive at PCF, where I was doing economic development initiatives in the Pacific region, and then thankfully here at Ministry for Pacific Peoples, all of that background has meant that I could run, thankfully, MPP the way that we have.
So currently, as Chief Executive of MPP and the only Pasifika CE in the public sector, you've actually been recognised for the job that you've done by being reappointed for a 5-year term, which demonstrates the confidence that's been placed in you. So what do you think that you bring to the table as a Pasifika person?
I think just kind of like the things that I've outlined, I still remember doing a leadership course, and one of the things that someone said in that leadership course is that we need to suppress who we are as a people, our values and all that, so that we can excel in this new environment. But everything within me and all that I'd learned when I was at ProCare and all that, I had to be my best me. So that's my best Samoanness, my best Pacific. These are the values that will mean if I'm my best me, then everything else will flow from that. And so the way that I've run MPP is the best Mac Samoan and all the lessons that I've learned from my mum, coupled with what I would have learned in my MBA and the things that I've done through my governance. So then the values of alofa, service, humility, all those things, consensus, leadership, that's how we run the Ministry for Pacific Peoples. And so it's funny when many that are Pacific in other parts of the sector come into MPP, they go, man, it's like I've come home. Because that's how we run the ministry. Our leadership team's called Tautua. The directors are called Te Iwanui, which is a Cook Island term for backbone. So it's the backbone of the organisation. And so those are the values that I bring to the fore when I'm running the Ministry for Pacific Peoples. And so, really blessed to get an extra 5 years. I actually asked if I was going to be extended, don't extend me for another 3, extend me for another 5, because it will show our community, but show my team that, what we've been able to deliver over the last 3 years has been, worth, there's been value to it. And so very grateful. But I've not changed who I am. I've not become more Pālangi so that I could run an agency. I've become more of who I've been brought up to be, to lead this agency. And even if my aspiration is to lead another government agency so that we move from 1 out of 34, 33 to the goal of being 4 or 5 of us chief executives in the public service, it's not going to change. If I run DIA or if I run Culture and Heritage or run any other agency, I'm not going to change the values that I bring to that agency, similar to how I ran or how I am currently running the Ministry for Pacific Peoples.
I want to hear more about bringing your best self to work, but first we've got to take a break.
Cool.
Welcome back to Talanoa Tupe. We're here in the studio with Laulu Mac Leauanae. Laulu, I really appreciated what you were saying just before the break about how you are the Chief Executive of the Ministry of Pacific Peoples, and you are there because you have taken with you your values and by being your best self and not by being a brown Pālangi, basically. I think that's something that I want to talk about a little bit more, is how we can use our cultural traits as an advantage in the workplace. But firstly, because there are so few of us who reach the position of chief executive in the public sector, could you outline the process? Like, how does one even become a chief executive?
Yeah, so I saw this question, and so I just looked back at my journal from that period. And so the application process was to end on February of 2017. And so there's an actual application process. You put your name forward, and then when you get shortlisted, they do a short little, the recruiting agency will give you a call. So then they obviously, from the application, they long list. Then from that long list, the recruiter will call and talk to you. And so, you do really have to bring your best foot forward. All of your experiences, you put that all in the application. And then you have your talking points ready, for when the call comes. So you're not trying to think on the spot. You're thinking of all the initiatives that you've done for Pacific, because it's the role for Ministry for Pacific Peoples. Then from there, they shortlist, and then of that shortlist, they go through an interview. I think there was probably 5 of us that were shortlisted. So they go through an interview process. There was a panel of 4. I flew down to Wellington because I was based in Auckland. Had the first one, it was like half an hour long. And then after that half hour, then they narrowed it down to I think 2 or 3. And then the 3 of us went through a psych assessment, a media testing, a whole heap of stuff like that. And then after that, I go back down for a week, and then based on the results of the psych test, then they do a 2-hour, go through the process of, based on your psych assessment, whatever. And then from there, they let you then know. So by the 31st of May, I was appointed as the chief executive. So it's quite a thorough process. And the recruiters and them, they do their own, there's the referee checks, but then they do their own, network. What's this Mac like, and, what does he do? Is he really Pacific? Can he deliver? Can he do things? So whilst there's the application process, we do have to have a body of work that you've done in your career that means that you're ready for this opportunity when it arises. I think the key thing is that, you know, in all of that, we're not shifting who we are. You know, whilst we work really hard and I still have to write the business case and we still have to write the financials and do all those things, but the attitude that we bring to that work, we're still, you know, how mum and dad, how they did things. I'm always reminded of my dad saying, son, it's your name. You're not going just you, it's the name that you carry, it's all of us. So, you know, that sense of pride in the work that you do means that you naturally will give your best.
So, just looking at your CV, so you had already been a chief executive of an organisation and you've got an MBA. So are those sorts of things prerequisites?
I think it does definitely help because, you know, there's one thing to be able to speak the thing and talk and have the background of the knowledge of how do we live as a Pacific person, but then the skill set. You know, we have to have the skills, we have to have the capability. So for me, when I knew I wanted to be a chief executive, I knew I needed to do a master's of business administration. I was fortunate when I was at the Pacific Business Trust, Jim Mather was the chief executive there, and he encouraged me to do the MBA. And so it was through that process that then, you know, did the MBA, and that really did help. You know, managing resources, managing information, managing operations, the technical side of the business. But then there's the people side, how you do manage and lead people. That's the art of the business that I love too. And so you have to have the capability, and that's sometimes forged through experience, but also through education. So the two go, you know, there's the melting pot of all of that. Means that you can excel or not excel when you're given the opportunity, and thankfully at the moment I'm doing all right.
Have we ever had a Pasifika chief executive outside of the Ministry of Pacific Peoples?
I don't think so. And when I started in the role, I was just hoping to do really well in the role. But about 3 or 6 months into the role, one of my colleagues challenged me and said, you know, Laulu, this can't be the end. This has to be just a stepping stone. And your aspirations in the public service have to be high. So I'm that kind of guy, and, you know, others will know, oh, okay, I have to go high. Okay, what's the top? I don't know what it is, but it's ingrained in, I think, Mum, you know, Mum always spoke life into me, and so I always thought, oh man, I'm going to go for the top. So, what's the top? State Services Commission? Oh yeah, cool, that's what I'm going to aim for. So what do I need to do to get there, and then just plan and plot my goals from there. And so I know my next role will have to be a chief executive in another mainstream agency. It's just the natural sense that I need to go within. So people will listen to this and go, how do you reconcile humility and then have that kind of aspiration, you know, and then you've actually said it. So that's not very humble of you, but it's like, that's the goal, you know. I've set that goal, and I'm going to try and achieve it with all the humility that Mum and Dad have instilled in me, you know, the reciprocity, the respect, the whaaaloalo, so we go.
I think that's really important too, about being clear about, you know, where you want to go and why you want to go there. I think humility is an attitude, right? And you've just outlined that the reason you want to go there is, you know, for service. So, so I guess the answer is we haven't had a Pasifika chief executive outside of MPP yet.
Yeah. And I think for us, we need at least 4 or 5 to reflect New Zealand out of the 34, 35 that are there. And then even in the deputy chief executives, I can't think of any, you know, apart from the deputy chief executives that are in MPP. So that has to change. And then the directors and so forth. We have this term, public service leadership team. So there's about 700 that are tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, 1%. 1% Pacific.
Yeah,
so it's not good enough. So of the 700, we need probably like at least another 70 of us in there. So we're doing well, but we need to do far better. And so, you know, we have to hustle on everything because nothing is going to be given to us. Just because you're Pacific And just because you are of this socioeconomic demographic and these things are where you're at, no one's going to go, oh, poor you, here, take this. Nah, we have to hustle. And just like our parents, when they came, they hustled for everything that they had, and it's the same for us today.
So the Public Service Commission has demonstrated a very high degree of confidence in you by appointing you for another 5 years. And that extends to the performance of your ministry. So what do you think is the key to the Ministry of Pacific People's success?
And then we as an agency, we had the right people, thankfully had the right people that came on board. I still remember saying in my interview when I was applying for this role, I said, if you choose me as the chief executive, I am of the generation that was born and raised here. I went through the whole system here, so I represent a generation of us. And if I come to this organisation as its leader, I know I will pull talent that will want to come, want to come and be part of this new journey. And thankfully, the right people came on board. So our business cases, the way we wrote our policy papers, the way we wrote our cabinet papers, they were awesome, with all humility. But they were, and so that's how we were able to secure through the budget bid process in the 2019 budget, 45 million over 4 years. And in the last budget, 20, we were able to secure 63 million over 4 years. So that's just under 120 million over a 4-year period, where previously we couldn't get $1. It was really, really difficult. The approach that we've taken, getting the right pool of people, and then just the way that we've run the ministry has meant that people feel, man, our vision is, to have a confident, thriving, resilient, prosperous Pacific Aotearoa. So that's our vision, and everyone's bought into that vision. And so everyone's bringing their best Pacific self to the work that they do. And then our 4 strategic goals, the importance of culture, language and identity, the importance of being a prosperous Pacific, whether it's job or in business, the importance of a healthy Pacific, a youthful Pacific, because we're a younger population. All these areas have allowed us to then really bring the best of our thinking to allow us to move the system to give us the resources that we've had. So there is a difference between when I first started and had $10 million to last year $20 million to this year having over $50 million per annum to spend. That means that we can do a lot more greater things to influence the system. But that all comes back to, confidence in the system and the work that we're doing, and just a really good group of people hustling hard.
So this year you were chosen amongst the CEs of the public sector to attend a leadership development at Oxford. What were some of the learnings that you gained from that experience?
I think first it was just so humbling to be the one, and it's Oxford, so I'm Massey boy. So just to be offered, how the Lord has allowed for that to transpire. But I think the overriding feeling that I had was that, sometimes you feel like an imposter. You feel like you don't belong, even though I was offered that role. But you feel before you start, oh man, are they sure they made the right call? And then as I was going through the whole process of Oxford, and the classes were awesome, were amazing, I think the overriding feeling that I had is that I belong. I belong here. This is exactly where I should be.
Yeah.
And I think that was the overriding feeling that I got. And then the dean of the school, she's a Kiwi, Professor Nari Woods, and so it was cool. Blavatnik School of Government to have another Kiwi there, and then just building and forming a relationship with her, and but that sense of being able to belong and not feel like I don't belong there. And a funny story, they only had 8 sessions available because we did it online this year, and they said, okay, give us 4 topics and then we'll give you 3. And then the administrator later on came back, oh hey Mac, there's actually available for more. You could have 1 more. And then I go, oh, can I go in all of them? So
There's a hustle.
So I got to go into the 7 of the year.
Wow.
Well, anyway, it was an amazing experience, but the sense of I belong there was the overriding feeling that I got from that process.
So in your current role, you work with other chief executives of the public sector on the ethnic pay gap. And Pacific people are still the lowest paid in the public service. So what do you think needs to change in order to close that gap?
A number of things, like so over 20% for Pacific women, which is just unforgivable. So we commissioned Professor Aha to do some a report on the ethnic pay gap and why, and then he had some recommendations around things that we should do. One of the things was underrepresentation. So if we don't see it, then we don't believe it, so that we don't aspire. And so that definitely needs to shift. The importance of your manager or your leader. So we need to train managers and leaders to be more cognizant of their Pacific talent, because if they don't do that, then we'll sponsor them through, then it's unlikely that it will happen. So there's a major shift around that. Racism plays a big role, but the term that we use is unconscious bias. So how do we maneuver that? That's difficult. It's shifting of attitudes, shifting of cultures. I think the amazing series that you did and how we were able to do a masterclass on the life of a Pacific professional, I think those types of things are really good, because it brings the mirror to how you think and how you deal with these kind of things. There's also, training that we have to do with our Pacific talent, because pay negotiation was also a big part. When we get the first offer, we are happy with that first offer. So there are things, understand the bands that you're in, understand, that and then position hard and know your value. Because if, so those are some of the things there out of the report. And then from a system perspective, we've been able to push through that in all of the annual reports. We're going to outline the ethnic pay gap and then the gender pay gap. So we're setting targets as a system, so to reduce that down. And so those are kinds of the system things, but then also the personal things that we have to do. The other thing that we have to do too is that we've looked at the value chain from internships to graduates to middle managers to CEs to governing roles and honours, and then having initiatives in each. So things like the Tuputai and the Tuputoa program for internships, making sure that we get graduates. So there's a pool of 300 that come through, making sure that there's 50 graduate roles available for these people to come through. So a number of things that we have to do, long-term things that we have to do, but it's worth the effort, yeah.
What's the most rewarding part of being the chief executive?
I think I'm just so humbled to have this opportunity to do this. It's really humbling to have the honour of the office. And my father passed away in December 2009, and so my mum and I, since COVID, we'd ring each other every day, and we'd just think of all the successes for now. In the role, and think, man, if Dad was still alive, he'd be so proud, because he'll see the dream that he had that drove him to do, the 2 8-hour-day jobs, and the hard labour jobs, welding, and that was years. That wasn't just 2 years, from his other job. That was hard, and so, to see what he did, and then to do what I'm doing now, that's the overriding sense of I'm so happy to be here, so proud of the opportunity to do this, to serve.
And I think that is, one of the really amazing things about our people. We're so resilient. Look what we've done in one generation.
Yeah, very blessed.
I have some quick-fire questions. Okay. So, what is your go-to karaoke song?
La Bamba.
Nice. Who was the most influential Pasifika you saw growing up?
Michael Jones.
If you weren't in your current profession, what would you be doing now?
I'd be a chef.
Wow. If you could invite any 3 people in history to a family dinner, who would it be?
any three people in history, and Tuiatua Tamasese, I'd love to invite him. Abraham Lincoln, he'd be really cool. And then probably Paul, the Apostle.
Oh wow,
The
that's
three,
interesting.
that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Different, but
Yeah.
Oh,
Interesting conversation. And last question, how do you want to be remembered?
I think just did what I was supposed to do. You know, I did what I was supposed to do, and that was to honour God, honour my wife, and honour my family, that they'd be proud. That's probably something.
Laulu, thank you so much for coming here today and sharing your leadership journey. I think quite often traits like humility and service are undervalued, but just thank you so much for proving that you can reach the top of your field by exemplifying those traits.
Thank you, Tupe, for the opportunity. What a blessing. Thank you.
In our next segment, we talk about one of the most important jobs one can do, which is parenting. Let's hear from the Martin Hautis Foundation Trust, which has been running parenting courses for the last 10 years.
My name is Marita Solomon.
And I'm Tale Solomon-Moore. And so for the last 10 years, we've been delivering a parenting program that focuses on a different idea each week to help our parents build more positive communication and bond with their children. Because parenting is the most important job that one will ever do. However, our precious gifts do not come with a manual. So that's our aim each week, to build more positive communication and bond. To be an attentive and appreciative audience, try and put 10 minutes aside, 10 to 20 minutes aside to spend with your child, to give your undivided attention. And the best way that we can show that our children have our undivided attention is to turn off our phones and to show through our positive communication, our facial expressions and body language, that we're happy to be with them. You will find that after, if you are consistent with putting aside 10 minutes a day, your child will not be disappointed when that time ends, because they know that it will happen each day.
Thank you for joining us. If you would like to know more about Martin Hautis Foundation Trust,
you can like our Facebook page and see the details on the screen.
Thank you for that awesome tip. These are great strategies for parents, but also grandparents, aunties and uncles, anyone in the village raising your child. Speaking of children, let's hear the answers to the Blue Pacific quiz.
Welcome back to the PSGL quiz.
Let's compare our answers.
This flag belongs to the Marshall Islands.
The capital of the Marshall Islands is Majuro.
The currency of Marshall Islands is the US dollar.
The leader of the Marshall Islands is President David Kamboa.
Thank you for joining us and hope you did well.
If you want to join the Pacific Social Justice League, follow us on our social media platforms. Mother!
Thanks everyone for joining us today. Now to end our show, we have Soul Brown and the Soul Sisters. Whawhetai te le lava mo le tātou polokalame le nei aso. Soifua ma ia manuia. See you next time on Talanoa Tupe.
Touchdown in 90 with FJ on Thursday. With one thing on my mind, it's time to lose it. When she comes around, she only brings her smile, which keep me coming back to these isles. Now the sun's going down in Suva, and all I see is a million of you. If we only have tonight together, Nongulewa, I'll love you forever. Friday and I'm sitting at the bar, Aggie Gray, sipping on a new with a view that takes my breath away. Her smile makes me think of the waters of Valepata, of Savai Manono, Pango and Apolima too. Now the sun's going down in Apia, and all I see is a million of you. We only have tonight together. Taine aulile, I'll love you forever. My heart's in Tonga, in Kuki Airani. My heart's in Tahiti, and you through the Pacific Ocean, my heart beats for you. Aotearoa, I didn't forget about you. Now the sun's going down in Manukau, and all I see is a million of you. We only have tonight together. I want you to know I'll love you forever.